Hey guys, it's your hacker boy Omni with a video here today to go over how we might be able to withstand the onslaught of polymorphic data when hooking into a particular piece of code. Most of the time, when we're hooking into a particular function, we have the liberty to safely make some assumptions in regards to the data we're processing. 99% of the time, if we're hooking into a function of code that deals with damage being done to a creature, and if in that function, the RBX register has an address stored in it that points to the target creature's health struct, if you will, we can write code that works off the assumption that the RBX register will always contain an address to such a struct. Taking it a step further, we can write code that works off the assumption that the actual location of the health value inside that health struct is always in the same place. It's sort of something we just take for granted, right? But what if the data that we're processing in that place in code is as varied as pebbles on the beach? Well, hopefully not that varied. But indeed, you may run into this problem if you're hooking into a rather complicated portion of code. For example, code responsible for building up skeletal structures that are about to be rendered. Indeed, hooking into such places of code is what inspired this video. What if the data structures we're dealing with contain a fluid assortment of members whose locations move around as well? In a sense, how do we handle polymorphic data? That is a type of data which has various specific implementations or manifestations, all which require separate handling. When we're writing hacks in assembly, this can be quite a daunting prospect. Because remember, one mistake, one access to a field that we're expecting to be a pointer that isn't a pointer, and game crash. As a demonstration, we're gonna take a look at a piece of code that I wrote for Dark Souls 2. It allowed me to change the scale of rendered models. There's no easy to manipulate dimensional scale value in the game, i.e. a float that I can set to 2 to double the height, etc. So I had to implement this functionality myself. And here's where I hooked that scale application code into. We are hooked into a very down low and scarily close to the mechanical metal of the CPU drawing function that is writing out the various matrix data points that are to be drawn by the 3D renderer. You can see RDX is being written into here, RDX 20 and RDX 10. It's being filled with whatever values are in XMM 1, 7, and 0. RDX through RDX plus 20 describe what is probably a 3x4 matrix that directly affects what the rendered models look like. So that's great, right? But what I needed to do here, since the code here basically shapes or morphs creatures to generate morphing targets specific to that character, is somehow figure out what is exactly being rendered here. Is it a character? Is it a rock on the ground? Do you think the answer to that, i.e. an identifiable data point, is easily found in either one of the loaded registers or the stack? No. When you're dealing with code that is so far removed from game rule execution code, i.e. sword hits face, how much health does the face have left? Indeed, code that is incredibly generalized in what it does, i.e. 3D rendering stuff, you might have to look pretty hard to find something that is going to be helpful in determining what the hell you're actually doing and what you're affecting. Indeed, one should expect quite the array of polymorphic data that you'd have to handle. For this code here, I determined that the source of identifying information as to what's being drawn would be found in the RBX register. The RBX register contains the address to a data structure known as the app folver model control. I don't really know how to pronounce it. I'm not even too sure what the first parts of that are supposed to represent, but it's basically a model-related structure. From this model-related structure, we must find the root structure for the particular character, known as either the player control or character control struct in this game. This is the struct that contains all other data related to the character, such as health, etc., and also the morphing targets that other code I have generates. But the model control struct is anything but a static struct. Let's look at some examples. I'm gonna put a breakpoint right here, and we're gonna have it filter out so it's only gonna break when we have RBX values that equal this particular value I'm about to put in right now. I see it, the breakpoint was hit here, great. So this is something that's being rendered here. Let's take a look at it. Do a structure dissect here. And it's one of those model control structs. Okay, so how can I find my character control struct? Well, for this one, we can find it if we go a little bit deep down into the structure here. And here, at offset 3A0, there's a pointer to the instance of this TSG render item, character model something or other. If we open that up and look at the 60th member here, 60th offset, we'll find a character model control. And then from here, at the 8th offset, we can find one of our root structures here. So character control, great, wonderful. So we can use this as a place to reliably get the character data right. Well, as you're about to see, we're gonna load up another RBX value here, and it's gonna look incredibly different, this app for whatever model control struct here. Quick review, we got to where we needed to be, 3A0 offset, 60 offset 8, gave us the character control struct. Let's go to the next RBX thing that we want to look at here. We're gonna have a break instead on this bad boy right here. Okay, it's hitting that one. Let's just take that same RBX. We're gonna do another structure dissect with that one. Remember, with the last one, we found the data that we needed at 3A0. Let's go to 3, uh-oh. Even though this is the same struct type, there's nothing resembling a pointer here at 3A0. Indeed, it's just a floating point value of 1. Oh wait, what's that up here? At 388, there's a pointer to one of those root character structs that we need. Player control in this case. But that wasn't there in the last struct, was it? So as you can see, polymorphic fluid data. Not fun to deal with. Still don't think this is a big deal? All right, let's look at another RBX value that gets processed here. This time, let's look at this guy. Okay, it broke on that, good. So this is something that's being handled. Let's take a look at this. Yet again, another app fell over model control. As you can see, there's no 3A0 this time. And also, there's no 388 pointer. This is vastly different from even the 2 previous examples. Where can we find it? Well, in this case, we can find it at 240 for the app for model instance param, which by the way, this pointer was in all the previous ones as well. However, the contents of this struct varies between the different types of data we have to handle as well. And in this instance, we have to look at 88, and then we can find the player control there. There's many different variations of data structs that I need to handle that are based off this offset right here. Like even if we look in that offset here, it's not always going to be at 88. In some cases, it was at I think 40, 48, and then it'd be a few levels deeper than that sometimes. It wouldn't just be the player control struct, it'd be another thing I'd have to look at. As you can see, we're dealing with data that requires us to go through sometimes multiple levels of pointer dereferencing in order to find what we need. This is a problem because these pointers can be in many different places, as you just saw. And if one attempts to dereference a particular pointer that isn't actually a pointer, the program is going to crash. To demonstrate why trying to work with this kind of data is going to just lead to crashes and more crashes, I just have some sample code here that I will inject into that area of code we're looking at. And we're going to make an access to one of the places that we visually saw held a pointer to the player control struct that we could get the identified information from. That's the first few lines of here. I'm just making sure that the RBX register itself is an address in memory, just for the purposes of this demonstration, where we will be replacing this here eventually with something a little bit more foolproof. But here I'm just making a read at the instance param struct that's located at 240, and then we're getting the player control struct here at 88, right? And if we turn that on, the game's gonna die. Lo and behold, the game died. So what can you do? Well, you can do some very basic validations. You can just check if the value at the maybe pointer address is non-zero. But what if that address is storing a random numeric value sometimes for something completely unrelated? Indeed, that would then result in a program crash, if that's not a pointer. You can check if the value falls within what an expected range of memory addresses would be for a pointer to point to. But this is also hardly foolproof and was not sufficient at all in the case of this game. Indeed, the first few times I tried to handle or hook into complicated areas of code like the function we're just looking at, I would do something just like that. But it was not good enough for this game here because it was too crazy. You'd have values that looked like pointers or addresses in memory that were valid, but they weren't, etc. For this game, I had to handle over 11 different variations of this particular struct in order to be able to process all the types of graphics that I wanted to. So how did I do this? And how can you make your code more resilient to varying types of data. Let's first talk about what we're going to need here. We need to be able to check whether a particular value actually describes an address of allocated memory. This is actually classically a very difficult problem in computing. We can't do this ourselves. We need the help of the old operating system in order to make this happen, at least without pulling our hair out. So we're going to make use of the system call here to the Microsoft function isBadReadPointer. Now, if we were writing code using a higher level language than assembly, I'd probably tell you that it might be a bad idea to use this function. That's a whole other topic of discussion itself, but indeed, if this was a normal program code, i.e. not a subversive Omnified hack, you'd probably want to use virtual query instead, but I'm not going to deal with calling that function in assembly. If you feel like it, please go right ahead and let me know how that worked for you. Let's take a look at isBadReadPointer's official documentation. We can see that documentation right here on Microsoft's website. It's got two parameters and it returns a bool. The first parameter, LP, is a pointer to the first byte of the memory block that we want to validate, see if we can access it, see if it's actually memory. And the second parameter, UCB, is the size of the memory block to validate in bytes. If it is a good pointer that we can read memory from, the return value will be 0. Otherwise, the return value is non-zero. So that's great and all that, but as you can see, this is obviously documentation that's useful for a higher level language. Syntax here, C++. How do we go about calling this in assembly? Let's take a look at that. So let's see how we can make use of this function in our code. Here's that sample code I had that crashed the game because we were making access to a address in memory that we thought was going to be a pointer, but wasn't, and actually just resulted in us opening up gobbledygook and program crashed. And we're going to be calling isBadReadPointer here. So just some important information about isBadReadPointer. That first parameter we looked at, that's going to be provided in the RCX register before we call isBadReadPointer. That second parameter will be in the RDX, and then once this is called, the return value is going to be in RAX. There's much more that we have to take into consideration as well, and so much so that we're going to write our own function that will simplify calling this. But before we write that own function, which we're going to call checkBadPointer or whatever, we're going to just go through this and see what it's going to look like to use it. So here's that sample code here, and the crash occurred either because dereferencing this caused us to dereference an address that wasn't actually an allocated address in memory, or this line down here. I'm actually going to get rid of all this other code up here, which is sort of a poor man's way to ensure that RBX itself was a valid place in memory. And we're going to see how we validate these addresses. So we first need to make sure that RBX is indeed a valid address in memory. Sometimes in this function, actually, RBX can be 0 and it can be the value 2. We don't care about those cases in the long run because, well, in those cases, it's impossible to get any kind of character identifying information from those. So we just need to check if RBX is a valid place in memory. How do we do that? Using our function. So RCX will be used as the parameter and return value for our function, so we want to back that up. And then we want to see if RBX plus 240, if I try to dereference that, is that going to be something valid? So I don't want to do move RCX RBX plus 240, because if this is not a valid place in memory, the game will crash horribly. We want to actually do a load effective address. So we'll just take what this address would be here, which is going to be RBX plus 240, throw that in RCX without dereferencing it. Then we just call checkBadPointer. Then that will write to the RCX register. Just going to compare that to 0. I'm going to pop RCX. And then if it is not equal to 0, we want to bail out of here because it's not a valid place in memory. If execution continues past that point, then RBX plus 240 is a safe address to dereference. But we also want to check the next one, the RAX plus 88. I'm going to back up 2 registers this time because I'm going to have to have an extra register to hold the interim address. And I'm going to move to RAX, that RBX plus 240, now guaranteed to be safe. And then I want to do a load effective address into RCX of RAX plus 88. I'm going to call checkBadPointer, compare ECX to 0, and then if it's not equal to 0, we get out of here. If it's still executing past this point, then these are safe accesses to make, and as you'll see, when we run this, after we write this out, the game will no longer crash. So what's check bad pointer gonna look like? It's gonna contain our invocation of the isBadReadPointer system call. It's gonna offer a much simplified way of doing this in a way that will ensure stability of your program. So let's allocate some memory for check bad pointer. Register it as a symbol. Let's add some quick code just to clean it up as well. Okay, the boring stuff done. Let's write this code out. One important thing to know about calling any Microsoft C API function or whatnot, anything outside of our code, is that there's a big chance it's gonna completely screw up the states, the values of many of our registers and even our SSE registers. And indeed, calling isBadReadPointer overwrites a whole bunch of registers we don't want to overwrite. And it also overwrites a number of SSE registers, those XMM registers, which is also very bad. If you don't back those up, there's a very high chance the game will crash. So we actually need to back up XMM 0 through XMM 5 first. Those are all overwritten potentially by check bad pointer. So make room on the stack for 16 bytes. We're gonna back up XMM 0, and we're gonna do that for all the SSE registers, all the way down to XMM 5. Right? Then at the bottom here, we're gonna restore the values of all those registers and also correct the stack. Starting with XMM 5 and going down. Let's restore the values of those registers and correct the stack. And XMM 0 is the last one we need to restore. And we are all good. Okay, so that's just backing up the SSE registers. We also need to back up some normal registers here. Namely, we need to back up the RAX register, which is overridden by the isBadReadPointer function. We need to back up the RDX register. We need to back up the R8 register. We need to back up the R9 register. And I believe that's about it for now. There's no online documentation really that will tell you this. The only reason why I know about these registers is because I figured it out through experimentation. So then let's restore these registers down here. We also need to back up the RBP register because we need to actually back up the stack pointer. We're going to be using the RBP register to do that. And then we need to align the stack properly. Otherwise, we're going to get some program crashes right here and now. We do that like so. Make some room for the callees here. And then to restore the RSP, we're just going to move to RSP what was an RBP, and then pop RBP. All right, stack preservation, register preservation is done. Here's where we do the goods. So the second parameter is EDX, right? And I'm just gonna have it validate the minimal, a minimal amount is 4 bytes. That's for that UCB parameter. Then RCX, before this function is called, is supposed to already be set to what address we want to validate. Then we call isBadReadPointer here. And then we take the return value, which is an EAX, and we're gonna throw that into our RCX. And we're doing that just to lessen the number of registers we have to back up prior to invoking this. This is for ease of use purposes. That way the input becomes the output. And then this is our beautiful check bad pointer code. And we can use this to see if memory is good or bad. Let's save this, load up that cheat table, and see if the game crashes still. And oops, one super important thing we forgot to add to the end of the check bad pointer function here, since it is a function, is we need to add that return instruction. Otherwise, well, we won't return, and the stack won't be corrected. Oopsie. Now, let's see if this fixes the problem. All right, here we got that table loaded up with that updated code here. And before, just inserting this code, just making those accesses by themselves would crash the game. Let's see if the game crashes now. The game is not crashing. Great. And let's see here. As we can see, we are accessing RBX was 240, RAX was 88, which we would then do stuff with. And we know this because the breakpoint hit here. But we're only accessing it when these addresses are valid places in memory. And so we've achieved being able to handle this type of data amongst a sea of data, like it, that isn't like it, that would cause a game to crash. And that's how you handle many varied types of data in complicated functions. That's how you handle polymorphic data with assembly while you're hacking them games. Hope you guys found this helpful. Hopefully it'll give you some tools that you need in order to do them crazy hacks or whatever you want in games or whatever you're hacking. If you like the content, hey, please give me that real nice warm feeling inside and subscribe to the channel. It's really appreciated. If you have any questions, just leave a comment below. To see my hacked gameplay live, the only place you can do that is, of course, my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Omni. You can always expect an insane time there. There'll be more videos to come, general and game specific. Until next time then, I'll see you guys. Bye.